The dangerous ones aren't the men who raise their voices, they're the ones who don't need to. Rain slid down the tall glass windows of the restaurant like slow tears, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and shadow as Emily Carter balanced a tray in one hand, her movement steady despite the ache in her feet after a 10-hour shift. At 28, she had learned how to survive on little sleep, small tips, and quiet strength, and in the back corner, just past the swinging kitchen door, her 6-year-old daughter Lily sat on a stool with a crayon clutched in her small fingers. Drawing houses with crooked roofs and bright suns that never matched the weather outside, Emily glanced at her between orders, always checking, always present, because everything she did, every hour she worked, came down to that small pair of eyes that trusted her completely. The bell above the front door chimed softly, but the change in the room was instant, like the air itself had tightened, conversations lowering, shoulders straightening. The kind of silence that didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. Adrian Volkov stepped inside without rushing, his coat dark with rain, his presence heavier than the storm outside, and people noticed him the way they noticed something they couldn't quite explain, something that made instincts sharpen and voices drop. Emily noticed too, but not the way the others did. She didn't look away, she didn't pretend he wasn't there, she simply watched for a second longer than most would dare, then turned back to her work as if he were just another customer walking in from the cold. When the hostess hesitated, unsure, Adrian said something low, calm, and she nodded quickly, leading him to the center table like the entire room had already agreed it belonged to him. Emily picked up her notepad and walked over, her steps even, her shoulders relaxed, the soft hum of rain filling the space between them as she stopped at his table, up close. He was exactly what people whispered about without saying his name, sharp lines, controlled stillness. Eyes that missed nothing. What can I get you? She asked, her voice clear, professional, untouched by the tension wrapping around the room. Adrian looked at her, really looked, as if measuring something he didn't expect to find, and for a brief second, the noise of the restaurant faded into something distant. Most people shifted under that kind of attention, most people filled the silence with nervous words or forced smiles. Emily didn't, she simply waited. Somewhere behind her, Lily laughed softly at her own drawing, the sound small but real, cutting through the quiet like a reminder of a different world. Adrian's gaze flickered past Emily, just for a moment, catching that sound, then returned to her face. "You're not nervous," he said, not as a question, but as an observation. Emily tilted her head slightly, the faintest hint of something like a smile touching her lips, not soft, not inviting, just honest. "Should I be?" she replied. The question hung between them, simple, direct, and for the first time since he walked in, something shifted in Adrian Volkov's expression, not anger, not amusement, something closer to interest. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and relentless, but inside, something else had already begun, something neither of them had planned, and neither of them would be able to walk away from. Adrian did not answer right away, and that silence stretched just long enough to make anyone else uncomfortable, but Emily simply stood there, pen poised above her notepad, waiting as if time belonged equally to both of them. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and even, asking for something simple, something ordinary, and she wrote it down without comment, without the polite laughter or nervous energy he was used to seeing, then turned to leave, ending the moment on her own terms. As she walked away, Adrian's gaze followed her, not in a way that claimed attention, but in a way that calculated it, noticing the steady pace of her steps, the way she glanced toward the back corner before disappearing through the kitchen door, noticing the small details most people missed. In the back, Lily looked up immediately, her eyes bright, her drawing now filled with uneven clouds and a stick figure holding a smaller hand, and Emily crouched beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair behind the girl's ear, her voice soft, completely different from the controlled tone she used on the floor. "You doing okay, kiddo?" she asked, and Lily nodded, holding up the drawing as if it were something priceless, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, to the quiet rhythm of breathing and the faint hum of kitchen noise beyond the door. When Emily returned with Adrian's order, the room felt even quieter than before, as if everyone was still aware of him without looking directly, and she set the glass down carefully, her movements precise, her focus on the task rather than the man watching her. "Anything else?" she asked, and again, no hesitation, no shift in tone, just the same calm presence. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. studying her as if she were a question he had not expected to ask, and for the first time, he tested it, not with force, but with something subtler, a request that did not quite fit, a suggestion wrapped in politeness but edged with assumption. Emily's expression did not change, but she shook her head gently, just once, her answer firm without being loud. "I am sorry, I cannot do that," and there was no apology in her eyes, only clarity. The air between them shifted again, sharper this time, like the moment before something breaks, but instead of tension, something else settled in Adrian's posture, something quieter, almost curious. Most people would have adjusted, would have found a way to agree, to smooth over the moment, but Emily did not, and that refusal, that simple boundary, landed harder than any raised voice ever could. Somewhere behind them, a glass clinked too loudly, a burst of laughter cutting through the silence as a group of well-dressed guests grew louder, one of them glancing over with the kind of careless entitlement that came from never being told no. And when Emily passed their table, one of them said something dismissive, something meant to pull her back into place, but she paused, just for a second, turning her head enough to meet his gaze, not challenging, not aggressive, just steady, and whatever she said in return was quiet, controlled, enough that the man blinked in surprise before looking away. Adrian noticed that too. He noticed everything. And as Emily moved back toward the kitchen, back toward the small world where her daughter waited, Adrian Volkov realized something that unsettled him more than defiance ever had, something he could not dismiss or control or ignore. She was not fearless because she did not understand danger, she was fearless because she had something more important than it, and that changed everything. The rest of the night did not return to normal, even if everyone pretended it had. The conversations resumed, the glasses clinked, and the soft music filled the space again, but something invisible had shifted, something that lingered in the way people avoided looking directly at Adrian's table and in the way the staff moved just a little more carefully around him. Emily continued her work as if nothing had changed, balancing trays, taking orders, keeping her voice steady and her pace consistent, but every few minutes, her eyes moved back to the kitchen door, checking, always checking, because Lily was still there, and that mattered more than anything happening out front. Adrian noticed that pattern too, the quiet rhythm of her attention, the way her focus never fully left the room behind the door, and it told him more than any background report ever could. When she returned to clear his table, he spoke again, not to test her this time, but to understand. His tone softer, almost thoughtful, asking, "You keep looking back there?" And Emily did not hesitate, did not deflect, she simply answered, "My daughter is there," as if that explained everything, and in a way, it did. Adrian's gaze shifted toward the kitchen door for a brief moment, then back to her, and there was something different in his expression now, something less distant, more focused, as if he had just found the center of a puzzle he had not known he was solving. "You bring her to work," he said, not judging, just observing, and Emily gave a small nod, her shoulders lifting slightly in a quiet acceptance of reality. "I do what I have to," she replied, and there was no shame in it, no apology, just truth. The simplicity of that answer stayed with him longer than it should have. Across the room, the same group of well-dressed guests grew louder again, one of them glancing toward Emily with a look that carried more assumption than respect, and this time, when she passed by, he spoke louder, his tone edged with impatience, asking for something in a way that expected immediate obedience. Emily stopped, not abruptly, but deliberately, turning to face him with the same calm expression she had shown all night, and whatever she said in response was again quiet, measured, enough to make the man pause, his confidence faltering just slightly before he leaned back, dismissing it with a shrug that did not quite hide his irritation. Adrian watched that exchange without moving, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table, his attention fixed not on the man, but on Emily, on the way she held her ground without raising her voice, without escalating, without shrinking. It was not defiance in the way he was used to seeing it, it was something steadier, something rooted deeper. When Emily returned to the kitchen again, the door swinging closed behind her, Adrian's gaze followed for a second longer than before, and then he reached into his jacket, pulling out his phone, his expression unreadable as he tapped the screen once, then paused, reconsidering. For a man who was used to knowing everything before it mattered, this was unfamiliar territory, this need to understand something without immediately controlling it. He slipped the phone back into his pocket instead, his decision quiet, almost unnoticeable, but significant all the same. In the back, Emily leaned against the counter for just a moment, her hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder as the girl looked up at her with a small smile, completely unaware of the attention they had drawn, completely unaware that the world beyond that kitchen door had already begun to shift around them. And out in the dining room, Adrian Volkov sat in stillness, his thoughts no longer on the business he had walked in with, but on a single, unexpected truth that had taken hold without permission: she did not belong to his world, and yet somehow, his world had already begun to move toward hers. By the time the dinner rush began to thin, the rain outside had softened into a quiet drizzle, the kind that left the streets shining under yellow streetlights, and inside the restaurant, the tension that had followed Adrian's arrival had settled into something more subtle, less visible, but no less present. Emily wiped down a table near the window, her movements slower now as the night stretched on, her energy carefully measured, every step saved for what still needed to be done. And in the back, Lily had curled up on a folded jacket, her small body finally giving into sleep, crayons scattered loosely around her hand like pieces of a world she had built and then drifted away from. Emily checked on her again, gently pulling the jacket higher over her shoulders, her fingers brushing softly against her hair, a quiet promise in that touch that nothing would get past her. When she stepped back onto the floor, Adrian was still there, his table cleared, his glass untouched for longer than it should have been, his presence now less about being seen and more about watching. And when Emily approached, there was no pretense left in the moment, no performance, just two people aware of each other in a way that did not need explanation. "We are closing soon," she said, her voice calm, not dismissive, just honest, and Adrian nodded once, as if he had already known, as if time inside that room moved differently for him. He stood, adjusting his coat with a quiet precision, and for a second, the distance between them felt smaller than it had all night. "You stay late," he said, not as a question, but as something he had already concluded, and Emily met his gaze without hesitation. "I leave when the work is done," she replied, simple, direct, and again, it was not the words that held his attention, it was the way she said them, the absence of anything unnecessary. As he reached for his wallet, the same group of guests from earlier rose from their table, their voices louder now, careless in the way people became when they believed the night belonged to them, and one of them brushed past Emily without looking, his shoulder knocking lightly against her arm, not enough to hurt, but enough to test the space she occupied. Emily steadied herself instantly, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, but this time, Adrian's attention shifted fully, his gaze following the man for a brief second before returning to her, and something in that glance carried weight, not visible, not spoken, but unmistakable. Emily noticed it, just for a moment, and her eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in awareness, as if she understood that whatever influence he held, it was not something she wanted directed on her behalf. "You do not need to do anything," she said quietly, before he even moved, her voice firm in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. Adrian paused, his hand still near his coat, and for the first time, there was the faintest trace of something unexpected in his expression, not irritation, not resistance, but recognition. She was setting a boundary again, not just for herself, but for how he existed around her. "I decide what I do," he replied, his tone steady, but softer than before, and Emily held his gaze without flinching. "Not for me," she answered, the words settled between them, not as a challenge, but as a line drawn clearly, and for a second, neither of them moved. Then Adrian gave the smallest nod, not agreement, not surrender, but acknowledgement, and he stepped past her, the door opening with a soft chime as he walked out into the damp night, his figure disappearing into the glow of streetlights. Inside, Emily exhaled slowly, the tension she had not allowed herself to feel finally easing just enough to notice, and when she turned back toward the kitchen, toward her daughter, she did not see the black car idling across the street, nor did she see the way Adrian paused beside it, his hand resting briefly on the door as he looked back at the restaurant, his decision forming not in words, but in something quieter, something more certain. She had told him not to act for her, and for the first time in a long time, Adrian Volkov found himself considering what it meant to act for someone without taking control, and that question stayed with him long after the car pulled away. The walk home was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that settled into the space between footsteps and made every sound feel sharper, the soft drip of rain from street signs, the distant hum of a passing car, the steady rhythm of Emily's breathing as she carried Lily against her shoulder, the child still asleep, her small hand curled loosely against Emily's jacket as if even in sleep she trusted that nothing would let her fall. The city felt different at this hour, less crowded, more honest. The lights no longer trying to impress anyone, just existing, and Emily moved through it with the same calm awareness she carried everywhere, her eyes scanning without looking like she was scanning, her posture relaxed but ready, because experience had taught her that quiet did not always mean safe. She reached their apartment building, an older structure with worn steps and a flickering light above the entrance, and she adjusted Lily slightly before pushing the door open with her shoulder. Stepping inside where the air was warmer. But no less still, upstairs, she laid Lily gently on the small bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin, her fingers lingering for a second on the girl's cheek before she stepped back, watching her breathe, counting the rise and fall like she always did, just to be sure. Only when she was certain did Emily turn away, moving into the narrow kitchen, filling a glass of water and leaning lightly against the counter, the events of the night replaying in fragments she had not allowed herself to feel. While she was working, the man with the steady eyes, the way he had watched her without trying to own the moment, the way he had stopped when she told him to, not because he had to, but because he had chosen to, that part stayed with her longer than it should have, and she did not like that. Outside, across the street, a car slowed briefly before continuing on, its headlights passing over the windows in a soft sweep of light that disappeared as quickly as it came, unnoticed by Emily as she stood in the dim kitchen, her thoughts turning back to what mattered, the bills stacked neatly on the counter, the schedule for the week ahead, the quiet math of survival she solved every day without complaint. She picked up one of Lily's drawings from the table, a crooked house under a bright yellow sun, two figures holding hands, and she traced the lines with her finger, her expression softening in a way no one at the restaurant would have recognized. Across the city, Adrian sat in the back of a moving car, the interior silent except for the low hum of the engine, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular, but his mind far from empty. He replayed the night not as a series of events, but as a pattern, each moment connecting in a way that refused to be dismissed, the refusal, the calm, the quiet strength that did not ask for permission or approval. "Find out everything," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, and the man in the front seat nodded without turning, understanding the weight behind those words. Adrian leaned back slightly, his eyes closing for a brief moment, not from fatigue, but from focus, because for the first time in a long time, something had entered his world without asking, without fear, without intention, and instead of pushing it away, he had let it stay. Back in the apartment, Emily turned off the kitchen light and walked back into the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed as Lily shifted slightly in her sleep, murmuring something soft and unintelligible before settling again, and Emily exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried both exhaustion and quiet resolve. Whatever the night had brought with it, whatever attention had brushed against her world for a moment, she would wake up tomorrow and continue the same way she always did, steady, focused, untouched. She did not know that someone else had already decided that her world would not remain untouched for much longer. Morning came quietly, not with alarms or urgency, but with soft light slipping through thin curtains and a faint sound of traffic waking up the city one block at a time. Emily was already awake before the light fully settled, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone slightly cold, her eyes scanning a handwritten list of expenses, numbers that never quite balanced but always had to, because there was no alternative. In the bedroom, Lily stirred, her small voice calling softly, and Emily stood immediately, the list forgotten as she moved to her side, brushing her hair back with a gentle hand, her voice warm, steady. "Good morning, kiddo," and Lily smiled in that simple, trusting way that made everything else feel temporary. Breakfast was quick, toast cut into uneven halves, a glass of milk, a quiet conversation about school and drawings and the kind of small things that mattered more than anything outside that apartment. Emily listened, really listened. Even as her mind kept track of time, of the next shift, of everything that needed to be done before the day could move forward. Across the city, Adrian stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, the skyline stretching out beneath him in sharp lines and muted colors, his reflection barely visible against the glass as a man behind him spoke in low, precise tones, listing details that would have seemed intrusive to anyone else, but to Adrian, they were simply information, pieces of a structure forming in his mind. Emily Carter, 28, works evenings at the restaurant, no criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond standard utilities, daughter, Lily Carter, 6 years old, enrolled in a public elementary school 3 blocks from their residence. The man paused briefly, then added, no significant connections, no known affiliations, and Adrian said nothing for a moment, his gaze fixed on the movement of cars far below, the rhythm of a city that never really stopped. And her schedule, he asked finally, his voice calm, controlled, and the man responded immediately, outlining her routine with careful accuracy. The hours she worked, the times she walked, the places she went. Without realizing she had become part of someone else's observation, Adrian nodded once, absorbing it, not with urgency, but with a quiet certainty that this knowledge mattered in a way he did not fully explain even to himself. Back in the apartment, Emily knelt in front of Lily, adjusting the straps of her backpack, making sure everything was in place, her hands moving with practiced ease, and for a moment, Lily looked at her with a thoughtful expression. Mom, are rich people scary? She asked suddenly, the question simple, unfiltered, and Emily paused, just for a second, her mind flickering back to the man from the night before, the way he had looked at her, not with threat, but with something she could not quite name. She smiled softly, tapping Lily's nose with her finger. Only if you decide they are, she said, her tone light but certain, and Lily nodded as if that answer made perfect sense, because to her, it did. The walk to school was calm, the air cool, the streets busier now, and Emily held Lily's hand as they crossed the intersection, her grip steady, her attention divided between the child beside her and the world around them, always aware, always present. What she did not notice was the same dark car from the night before passing slowly at the corner, its presence brief, its purpose unseen, and inside, Adrian watched without expression, not as a hunter, not as a threat, but as someone observing something rare, something that did not bend under pressure or expectation. As Lily disappeared through the school doors with a quick wave, Emily turned to leave, unaware that her life, which she believed to be contained within the boundaries she had built, had already begun to expand beyond them, shaped quietly by someone who was no longer willing to remain just a stranger in the background. The rest of the morning moved like it always did, steady and predictable, but something beneath it felt slightly off, like a note in a song played just a fraction too low. Emily felt it in small ways, in the way her attention lingered half a second longer at intersections, in the way her eyes tracked reflections in store windows without fully acknowledging why, not fear, not yet, just awareness sharpening itself without permission. She stopped by a small grocery on the corner, picking up a few things she had calculated down to the dollar the night before, her movements efficient, her mind already planning the next shift, the next bill, the next hour. Inside the store, everything was ordinary, the hum of refrigerators, the soft beep of a register, a cashier who barely looked up, and for a moment, the feeling faded, replaced by routine, by the comfort of knowing exactly what needed to be done. Across the street, a car idled longer than necessary, its presence blending into the city's background. Unnoticed by most, but not entirely invisible, inside, Adrian sat in silence, his gaze following Emily through the glass as she moved between aisles, not with urgency, not with possession, but with a quiet focus that did not break. And beside him, a man spoke in low tones, updating him on something unrelated, something that would have demanded his full attention any other day, but now seemed distant, secondary. Adrian did not interrupt, but he did not respond either, his attention anchored elsewhere in a way that was new, unfamiliar. When Emily stepped out of the store, the bell above the door chiming softly, she adjusted the strap of her bag and started down the sidewalk, the city flowing around her in its usual rhythm. And again, that feeling returned, subtle but present, like being watched without proof, like knowing something without evidence. She slowed slightly, not enough for anyone to notice, her eyes shifting just enough to scan without appearing to scan, and for a brief second, her gaze brushed past the dark car at the curb, not stopping, not focusing, but registering it somewhere beneath conscious thought. Inside the car, Adrian saw that moment, saw the instinct in the way her posture adjusted, the way her pace remained steady even as her awareness sharpened, and something in that reaction held his attention more than anything else, not because she had noticed him, but because she had not panicked when she sensed something was there. Emily continued walking, turning the corner toward her apartment, her grip on the bag tightening just slightly before relaxing again, her breath steady, her expression unchanged, and by the time she reached her building, the feeling had already begun to fade, dismissed as nothing more than a passing thought. Something the city created in people who learned to pay attention. Upstairs, she set the groceries on the counter and exhaled slowly, grounding herself in the familiar, in the small space that had always been enough, while across the street, the car remained for a few seconds longer before pulling away, merging into traffic as if it had never been there at all. Adrian leaned back in his seat, his gaze shifting forward as the city moved past the windows, and for the first time, there was something close to restraint in his decision. Something deliberate in the way he chose not to step closer yet. Not to disrupt what he was observing, because whatever this was, whatever she was, it was not something that responded well to force, and he understood that more clearly with every passing moment. Back in the apartment, Emily moved through her routine again, unaware that the line between her world and his had already blurred, not through action, but through attention, and that quiet attention was beginning to shape everything that would come next. By the time afternoon settled over the city, the light had shifted into something softer, stretching shadows along the sidewalks as people moved through their routines without noticing how close they came to crossing paths with something unseen. Emily arrived early to pick up Lily, standing just outside the school gate with her arms loosely crossed, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert, scanning without appearing to. The same quiet awareness that had followed her all morning now settling into something more familiar, something she could not quite name but chose not to ignore. Children spilled out in waves of laughter and backpacks and small voices calling for attention, and when Lily appeared, her face lighting up the moment she spotted her mother, Emily's expression softened instantly, the tension she carried dissolving into something warm and grounding as she knelt slightly to catch her daughter's momentum, lifting her just enough to hear the excited rush of words about drawings and recess and a story her teacher had read. For a moment, the world narrowed again, just the two of them, just the simple rhythm of connection that made everything else feel distant. Across the street, the same dark car remained parked, its engine off now, its presence blending into the line of vehicles along the curb, and inside, Adrian watched without moving, his gaze steady as he observed the interaction. Not intruding, not approaching, just witnessing something that did not belong to his world yet held his attention with an intensity he did not question. Emily stood, adjusting Lily's backpack, and as they began walking, Lily slipped her hand into Emily's without thinking, her small fingers curling naturally into place, and Emily tightened her grip just slightly, a reflex born from instinct more than fear. Halfway down the block, Lily paused, pointing toward a street vendor selling small paper pinwheels that spun lazily in the breeze, their colors bright against the gray of the city, and Emily hesitated for a second, mentally calculating, then smiled and nodded, allowing the small detour because some things mattered more than numbers. She paid in cash, exact change, her movements precise, and handed the pinwheel to Lily, who watched it spin with quiet delight, the simple motion enough to hold her full attention. As they turned to continue home, Emily's gaze lifted briefly, scanning the street out of habit, and this time, her eyes paused for just a fraction longer on the row of parked cars, not recognizing any one vehicle, but sensing something just beyond clarity, something that did not quite fit. Adrian saw that moment again, saw the way her awareness sharpened without breaking her calm, and instead of stepping out, instead of closing the distance he could easily control, he remained where he was, his decision not driven by hesitation, but by understanding. Because whatever this connection was forming, it was not built on force, and forcing it would only break what made it different. Emily looked away after a second, dismissing the feeling as she always did, turning her attention back to Lily, who was now spinning the pinwheel faster, laughing softly as the colors blurred into one, and together they continued down the street, their steps in sync, their world contained within the space they shared. Inside the car, Adrian finally shifted, leaning back slightly, his eyes closing for a brief moment before opening again, his focus returning not to them, but to the decision forming beneath everything else, a decision that would move him from observer to something else entirely, something closer, something more present. And as the city continued around him, unaware, he understood one thing with complete certainty: he was no longer watching by chance, he was choosing to stay. Evening returned with a quiet weight, the sky dimming into deep shades of blue as the city lights came alive one by one, and inside the small apartment, Emily moved through her routine with practiced precision. Dinner simple but warm, the kind that filled the room with a sense of comfort that could not be measured in dollars, and Lily sat at the table swinging her legs, the pinwheel now resting beside her plate like a small trophy from the day. Emily watched her between movements, noting every detail the way she always did, the energy in her voice, the way she laughed, the ease of it, because those small things mattered more than anything else, more than the bills, more than the hours, more than the quiet unease that still lingered at the edges of her awareness. After dinner, Lily insisted on showing her drawing again, adding new lines, new colors, explaining each part with careful seriousness, and Emily listened, nodding, asking questions, fully present in a way that made the outside world fade completely for a while. Later, as the apartment settled into silence, Lily drifted to sleep again, her breathing slow and even, and Emily stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, making sure everything was exactly as it should be before turning away. In the living room, she sat on the worn couch, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows against the walls, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel it clearly, the sense that something had changed, not in a way she could point to, not in a way she could explain, but in a way that made her instincts stay alert even in stillness. Across the city, Adrian stood in a room that felt too large for anything ordinary, the silence around him different from hers, heavier, shaped by control rather than necessity, and a man across from him spoke in careful, measured words, updating him on movements, on names, on things that usually defined his attention. But tonight, Adrian listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, his thoughts layered beneath the surface. There has been interest, the man said finally, his tone shifting slightly. Someone connected to the restaurant, not directly, but enough to notice patterns, and Adrian's gaze lifted, sharp now, focused in a way it had not been before. Explain, he said. And the man continued, outlining small details, nothing definitive, but enough to suggest that Emily's world had not gone entirely unseen by others. Adrian absorbed the information in silence, the pieces fitting together in a way that shifted his earlier restraint into something more decisive. Because observation was one thing, but risk, even potential, was something else entirely. Back in the apartment, Emily stood and moved to the window, her fingers brushing the curtain aside just slightly, looking out at the street below, the cars passing, the lights reflecting off damp pavement, everything appearing exactly as it should, and yet, she did not step away immediately, her gaze lingering, her instincts not fully satisfied. She let the curtain fall back into place and exhaled slowly, grounding herself again, reminding herself that awareness did not always mean danger, that not every shadow carried meaning. But across the city, Adrian had already reached a different conclusion, one that did not rely on uncertainty or assumption, and as he turned away from the window in his own space, his voice low, controlled, he gave a single instruction that would quietly alter the direction of everything that followed. She is no longer to be observed from a distance, he said, pausing just long enough for the weight of those words to settle. If there is any movement near her, I know first. And in that moment, without her knowing, without anything visible changing at all, Emily's world shifted again, not through force, not through confrontation, but through a decision made far beyond her sight, a decision that would bring something closer than she had ever intended to let in. The next day did not begin with noise or warning, but with something quieter, something that settled into the edges of routine like a shadow that refused to fully disappear. Emily woke before the alarm again, her body already tuned to the rhythm of responsibility, her mind moving through the checklist of the day before her eyes had even adjusted to the light, and beside her, Lily slept peacefully, unaware that anything beyond their small world had begun to shift. The morning carried on as usual, breakfast simple, conversations light, the kind of normal that felt earned rather than given, and when they stepped out onto the street, the air was crisp, the city already in motion, people passing without noticing each other, each caught in their own direction. Emily held Lily's hand as they walked, her grip steady, her attention divided between the child beside her and the subtle awareness that had not left her since the night before, not fear, not panic, just a quiet instinct that something was different, something just beyond reach. Across the street, a man leaned casually against a parked car, his posture relaxed, his presence blending in with the morning crowd, and yet, his eyes followed them for a moment longer than coincidence allowed, not intrusive, not obvious, but deliberate. Emily did not look directly at him. But something in her pace adjusted, a fraction slower, a fraction more aware, her senses sharpening in a way she could not ignore now. She knelt briefly outside the school gate, adjusting Lily's jacket, her voice calm, steady. "Stay close to your teacher today, okay?" she said, not out of fear, but out of instinct, and Lily nodded without question, her trust immediate and complete. As the school doors closed behind her daughter, Emily stood there for a second longer than usual, her gaze scanning the street, this time not dismissing the feeling, not brushing it aside, because it had crossed from intuition into something closer to certainty. Miles away, Adrian stood in the same quiet room, his phone in his hand, listening as a voice on the other end spoke quickly, efficiently, confirming what he had already anticipated. "There was movement this morning," the voice said, not direct, but close enough to suggest interest, and Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his posture sharpened, his focus narrowing into something precise. "Stay ahead of it," he replied, his tone low, controlled, and the line went silent immediately after, the instruction understood without explanation. Back on the street, Emily turned away from the school, her steps measured, her breathing steady, but now, every reflection in every window held more meaning, every passerby registered in a way it had not before. And when she reached the corner, she stopped, not abruptly, but intentionally, her eyes lifting just enough to meet the gaze of the man leaning against the car for the briefest moment, and in that second, something passed between them, not recognition, not confrontation, but awareness, clear and undeniable. She did not speak, did not react, she simply turned and continued walking, her decision made in silence, because whatever this was, whatever had begun to move around her life, she would not let it control the way she lived it. Inside the car parked half a block away, Adrian watched that moment unfold through the reflection of a storefront window, his expression unreadable, but his decision now complete, because she had crossed from being observed into being noticed, and that changed everything. As Emily disappeared into the flow of the city, unaware of how close the distance between her world and his had become, Adrian stepped forward, no longer content to remain behind the glass, because some lines, once seen, were not meant to stay distant, and he had already decided he would not let this one fade. The shift that evening felt different from the moment Emily stepped inside the restaurant, not because anything obvious had changed, but because everything felt just slightly out of place, like a room where the furniture had been moved an inch without anyone saying why. She tied her apron, her movement steady, her face composed, but her eyes were sharper now, more deliberate in the way they moved across the space, noticing who sat where, who watched, who did not belong. The same group from before had not returned, but the absence did not bring relief, only a different kind of awareness, one that stayed with her as she moved between tables, her voice calm, her posture controlled, every step measured as if she were walking through something invisible. Near the entrance, a man sat alone, not eating, not drinking, his attention too still to be casual, and Emily noticed him the way she noticed everything now, without staring, without reacting, simply marking his presence and continuing her work. In the back, Lily sat again with her drawings, her small world unchanged, her trust unbroken, and Emily checked on her more often than usual, each glance a quiet confirmation that nothing had crossed the line she could not control. Across the room, the man at the entrance shifted slightly, his gaze following Emily for a moment before returning to the empty space in front of him, and though nothing in his posture was threatening, nothing in his behavior overt, there was something in the way he remained that made the air feel tighter. Outside, a black car pulled to the curb, its engine idling softly, blending into the noise of the city, and Adrian stepped out, his presence once again altering the atmosphere before he even crossed the threshold. Conversations lowering, attention shifting, the same unspoken reaction rippling through the room. Emily saw him immediately, not because she was looking for him, but because her awareness now caught everything that mattered, and for a brief second, their eyes met across the distance, the recognition immediate, the memory of the night before settling between them without a word. Adrian walked in without hesitation, his gaze moving once around the room, taking in details, measuring positions, and when it reached the man near the entrance, it paused, just long enough to register something that did not belong, something that aligned too closely with the information he had received earlier. He did not react outwardly, did not change pace, but the shift in his focus was precise, controlled, and final. Emily approached his table again, her expression unchanged, her voice steady. "What can I get you?" she asked. As if nothing beyond that moment existed, and Adrian looked at her, not as he had before. Not with curiosity alone, but with something more defined, something that carried decision behind it. "Water," he said simply, his tone even, but his attention did not leave her, as if he were confirming something he had already chosen. She nodded and turned away, her movement smooth, but inside, the awareness had sharpened again, the feeling from the morning returning stronger now, no longer something she could dismiss. When she came back with the glass, she set it down carefully, her hand steady, and for a second longer than necessary, she looked at him, not questioning, not asking, but acknowledging the shift she could feel without understanding. Adrian held that look, and in it, there was no demand, no control, only a quiet certainty that something had already moved beyond choice. Across the room, the man near the entrance stood slowly, his movements subtle but deliberate, and though no one else seemed to notice, Adrian did, his attention narrowing instantly, his posture adjusting just enough to signal readiness without drawing attention. Emily sensed it too, not the details, not the reason, but the change in the air, the way the room seemed to hold its breath for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, without a single word spoken, without any visible action taken, the line between her world and his disappeared completely, replaced by something else entirely, something that was no longer distant, no longer optional, something that had already begun to close in around them both. The moment did not break the way tension usually did. There was no sudden noise, no visible disruption, just a quiet shift that passed through the room like a current, subtle but undeniable, and Emily felt it before she understood it, her body reacting before her thoughts could catch up, her attention pulling toward the back of the restaurant where Lily sat, still drawing, still safe, but suddenly no longer separate from whatever had just entered the space. Adrian remained seated, his posture unchanged to anyone watching, but his focus had narrowed completely, every detail of the room falling into place with sharp precision, the man near the entrance no longer just a presence but a pattern, something that did not belong, something that moved with intent rather than purpose. Emily turned slightly, her tray still balanced in her hand, her eyes moving without urgency but with clarity now, and when she looked toward the man, she saw it too, not what he was, not why he was there, but that he did not fit, that his stillness was not neutral, and for the first time, her instinct did not settle, it sharpened. The man took a step, slow, controlled, his attention shifting past Emily toward the back, toward the kitchen door, and that was enough for everything to change without a single word being spoken. Adrian stood then, not abruptly, not in a way that drew attention, but with a calm certainty that cut through the room more effectively than any raised voice could have. And when he moved, the space around him adjusted instinctively, people stepping aside without knowing why, the air itself making room. Emily saw him move, saw the direction of his focus, and in that instant, understanding replaced uncertainty, not complete, not detailed, but enough to know that whatever this was, it was now close to the only thing that mattered. She set the tray down without looking, her hands steady even as her heartbeat shifted, and she took a step back toward the kitchen, not running, not panicking, just moving with intention, her eyes never leaving the space between Adrian and the man. Adrian reached the midpoint of the room, his gaze fixed, his presence now undeniable, and the man paused, just for a fraction of a second, something in his expression shifting as if recalculating, as if realizing that whatever he had expected was no longer aligned with reality. Nothing else moved, not really, the conversations around them continuing in low murmurs, the illusion of normal intact, but underneath it, something else had taken hold, something controlled, something contained. Emily reached the kitchen door and pushed it open, stepping inside where Lily looked up immediately, her small voice asking a question that Emily answered with a calm smile, a reassurance that did not break even for a second, because fear was not something she allowed to cross that threshold. Outside, Adrian stopped a few feet from the man, close enough that the distance no longer protected anything, and though no one else heard the words exchanged, the shift in the air was enough to tell the outcome. The man stepping back, not forced, not threatened, but redirected, as if the path he had chosen no longer existed. Adrian did not follow, did not escalate, he simply remained where he was until the presence was gone, until the imbalance in the room settled back into something that resembled normal again. Only then did he turn, his gaze moving directly to the kitchen door, to the place where Emily had disappeared, and for a moment, the weight of everything that had just happened rested in that silent connection between spaces, unseen but undeniable, and when Emily stepped back out a few seconds later, her eyes met his again, not questioning, not afraid, but fully aware now. That whatever line had once existed between their worlds had not just blurred, it had been crossed, and there was no going back. The room returned to motion as if nothing had happened, conversations rising again in soft layers, glasses touching, chairs shifting, the illusion of normal carefully rebuilding itself around something that had already changed beneath the surface. Emily stood still. For a moment after stepping out of the kitchen, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the counter, her breathing steady even as her awareness remained sharp, no longer questioning what she had felt but accepting it for what it was, something real, something close. Across the room, Adrian had not moved far, his presence no longer directed outward but held in place, controlled. As if he had drawn a boundary that others could not see but would not cross again. Their eyes met once more, and this time there was no distance left in the moment, no uncertainty, just a quiet understanding that something had shifted in a way neither of them could ignore. Emily walked toward him, not rushed, not hesitant, her steps measured, and when she reached the table, her voice was calm, but no longer neutral. "You knew," she said, not accusing, not asking, simply stating what had become clear. And Adrian did not deny it, did not soften it, he simply held her gaze. "I knew enough," he replied, his tone low, controlled, carrying weight without pressure. Emily exhaled slowly, her eyes steady on his. "And you decided to act anyway," she continued, and there was no anger in her voice, only clarity, the same clarity she had shown from the beginning. Adrian inclined his head slightly, not as an apology, but as acknowledgement. "I removed what should not have been near you," he said, the words simple, direct, and for a second, silence settled between them again, but this time it was different. Not uncertain, not tense, but filled with something that had already taken root. Emily looked at him for a long moment, searching not for answers, but for truth, and whatever she saw there did not make her step back, did not make her look away. Instead, she spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "You do not get to decide my world," and the line was clear, the boundary unchanged, but this time, Adrian's response came without resistance. Without contradiction. "No," he said, just once, his gaze unwavering, "but I decide what reaches it," and the difference in those words settled between them, subtle but undeniable. Behind her, the kitchen door moved slightly as Lily shifted inside, her presence a quiet reminder of everything that mattered, and Emily glanced back for a second before returning her attention to him, her posture straight, her expression composed, but something in her eyes had changed, not fear, not acceptance, but awareness of the space he now occupied in her life. Adrian reached into his jacket slowly, not in a way that alarmed, but in a way that signaled intention, and when he placed a small card on the table, it was done without emphasis, without expectation. "If anything changes," he said, his voice even, "you will not handle it alone," and there was no command in it, no demand, just a statement that existed whether she accepted it or not. Emily looked at the card but did not touch it, her gaze lifting back to his. "I have handled everything alone so far," she replied, and Adrian held that look for a moment longer before answering. "That is why you should not have to anymore," and for the first time, there was something in his voice that was not control, not power, but something quieter, something closer to respect. The moment stretched, balanced on something neither of them named, and then Adrian stepped back, giving her space without turning away completely, his presence still there, still undeniable, but no longer closing in. Emily remained where she was, the card still untouched on the table, her thoughts steady, her boundaries intact, but her world no longer as contained as it had been before. Outside, the city continued without pause, lights reflecting against the night, people moving through their own stories, unaware that inside a small restaurant, two lives had just crossed in a way that would not be undone. And as Emily finally reached for the card, not with hesitation, but with quiet acceptance of what it represented, one truth settled into place: he had not chosen her because she needed him, he had chosen her because she did not.